Thank you so much, Scout, for bringing such an important perspective, not only to this symposium today, but to the book of Groundswell, which is probably the first of its kind to incorporate that perspective. So thank you. Up next, we have Anna Lovatt, Associate Professor of Art History at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, with a paper titled Only Connect, Art, Feminism, and Ecology in the 1980s. Please welcome Anna.
Thank you, Lee, for inviting me to participate in this symposium and to contribute to the catalogue for this wonderful exhibition. What can women do about the disastrous direction the world is taking? Asked the editors of the feminist magazine Heresies in 1981. The cover of the publication's 13th issue, Earth-Shaking, Earth-Keeping, Feminism and Ecology, featured an apocalyptic image of volcanic ash billowing out of Mount St. Helens in the state of Washington the previous year. Claiming the volcano as a symbol of the revolt of nature, the editors of the issue sought to integrate feminist and ecological concerns. Inside the journal, contributions by anthropologists, biologists, ecofeminists, indigenous activists, as we've seen, poets and psychologists jostled for space. Shifts in font, layout, and orientation, making for a cacophonous reading experience. Yet a unifying theme was the interconnectedness of various forms of oppression, including sexism, racism, economic inequality, and environmental degradation. The feminist revolution was not separate from the environmental movement, the contributors argued, but intimately bound up with it. In this talk, I'll use the 13th issue of Heresies to contextualize the work of some of the artists featured in its pages and also in the exhibition Groundswell, namely Ana Mendieta, Michelle Stuart, Maren Hassinger, and Patricia Johanson. Heresies was the idea of Stuart and her neighbour Joyce Kozloff, who wanted to produce a magazine that would be given out at stores, focusing on women's achievements throughout history. Around 1975, they initiated a series of meetings that resulted in the formation of the journal's founding group, which came to be known as the Mother Collective. While this group ensured the publication's continuation, each issue was edited by a different collective of artists, writers, and activists invested in its particular theme. Heresies also became a microcosm of dissent within the feminist movement, struggles that played out in fractious weekly meetings and in the journal's pages. A pivotal moment came in spring 1978 with a letter to the editors by the Combahee River Collective. Responding to the third issue, Lesbian Art and Artists, the group questioned the lack of women of colour in that issue and in the Mother Collective itself. Although women of colour frequently contributed to Heresies and subsequently made up the issue collectives for issue 8, Third World Women, which you can see here, and issue 15, Racism is the Issue, which is on the bottom right here, the lack of diversity among the Mother Collective remained a source of controversy and regret. Earth-Shaking, Earth-Keeping, Feminism and Ecology was published in the fall of 1981. The editorial collective was made up of 13 writers and visual artists, including Lucy Lepard, Mendieta, Sabra Moore, and Merla Temkin. In their opening statement, the group defined ecology broadly as the relationship between organisms and their environment, emphasizing dynamic interactions from the level of the individual to that of the biosphere. This ecological perspective also highlighted the relationships between various forms of subjugation, with contributor Joan L. Griscom arguing in one of the opening essays that racism, sexism, class exploitation, and ecological destruction are the four interlocking pillars upon which the structure of the patriarchy rests. Although the term ecofeminism was not used in Heresies 13, it was subsequently popularized by another of the issue's contributors, Inestra King. In her essay for Heresies, King argued that what she then called ecological feminism offered the possibility of moving beyond the rifts that had emerged between feminists who prioritize nature and the body and those more focused on social inequalities. 6 years later, King reached a wider audience when her article, What is Ecofeminism?, was published in The Nation. There, she argued that ecofeminism had been mischaracterized in the left-wing media and also the mainstream media, asserting that the movement did not have its basis in goddess culture or earth-based spirituality. Rather, King argued that ecofeminists were, quote, committed to the liberation of women and a critique of the structures of domination in the family, the state, and the economy, while striving for a renewed respect and sense of connection to non-human nature. This understanding of ecofeminism as a critique of interlocking structures of power forms a productive entry point for considering the work of some of the visual artists represented in Heresies 13. Ana Mendieta's contribution to the journal was the short text La Venus Negra, based on a Cuban legend. Here, Mendieta recounts the fable of a young woman encountered by Spanish colonists on the Cayo Loco, a key off the south coast of Cuba, in 1817. The woman who the colonists named the Black Venus was said to be the last descendants of the Taino, an indigenous people who'd inhabited Cuba in the 15th and 16th centuries. According to the legend which Mendieta recounts, one of the colonists captured the Black Venus and provided her with food and clothing, expecting her domestic and sexual servitude in return. But Mendieta narrates, the woman retreated to a corner of his home, refusing to eat or dress. Disarmed by these quiet acts of resistance, the colonist returned the Black Venus to the Cayo Loco. Today, Mendieta concludes, the Black Venus has become a legendary symbol against slavery. She represents the affirmation of a free and natural being who refuses to be colonized. Mendieta's text was accompanied by a photograph of an untitled work executed in Iowa in 1980 as part of her Silueta series. Mounds of earth were shaped into an elongated female figure, the central crevice of which was filled with gunpowder and set alight in a similar way to her later work, untitled Maroya of 1982. The photograph reproduced in Heresies captures a moment after the blaze had gone out, the scorched earth working in conjunction with the text to conjure the elusive presence of the Black Venus. Heresies 13 coincided with an exhibition of 8 photographs of Mendieta's Rupestrian sculptures shown at AIR Gallery in New York in November 1981. During the late 1970s, improved diplomatic relations between Cuba and the United States allowed exiles like Mendieta to visit relatives in their homeland on a short-term basis. Mendieta visited a number of times and executed the Rupestrian sculptures in the limestone cliffs and caves known as Jaruco's Stairs near Havana. During the 15th century, the caves that had previously housed Taino sculptures and petroglyphs were used to hide shamanic paraphernalia from the Spanish. 4 centuries later, during the Cuban War of Independence, the same caves functioned as a sanctuary for the Liberation Army. In these caves, then, Mendieta chose a richly evocative site, steeped in colonial and revolutionary history. Mendieta also undertook extensive research on the Taino, describing herself as their cultural inheritor, just as she strategically aligned herself with the figure of the Black Venus. Mendieta's Cuban works draw on Taino mythology in their titles, their iconography, and their handling of materials. The Taino regarded caves as sacred, primordial sites from which their ancestors had emerged. In one legend, a man tasked with guarding the caves was late for his duty and was turned into stone. The other guards, who had gone fishing, were captured by the sun and turned into trees. Bacayu of 1981, like many works in Mendieta's oeuvre, manifests this fluidity between animal, vegetable, and mineral, and a desire for communion with the earth. Here, Mendieta transformed a shard of rock into a female body, using paint and a chisel to define the pendulous breasts and tapering abdomen. The pantheistic world of the Taino is brought into dialogue with the relational and democratic politics of ecofeminism, in which, to quote Griscom, all participate equally, rocks as much as persons, male as much as females. Like Mendieta, Michelle Stuart began her article for Heresies 13 with a centuries-old story, subverting the intentions of the original narrator. Under the heading Logbook for Disgrace, she described the disastrous final voyage of the ship Desire, the third vessel in history to circumnavigate the globe. The crew of the Desire had participated in the colonial plunder referenced in Mendieta's story, their ship returning from its first voyage to England in 1588 with its topmast covered in gold-coloured cloth, her sailors clothed in silk, her sails made of damask, and her holds filled with looted objects from Chile, Peru, and Mexico, along with a captured Manila galleon previously owned by Philip II of Spain. This pillaging continued on the ship's second expedition, when the crew clubbed 14,000 penguins to death on an island off the coast of Argentina. The penguins were dried, salted, and stowed in the ship's hold as food for the crew. But, as Stuart notes in her Logbook for Disgrace, in the tropical heat, the corpses began to rot, breeding a worm that gnawed through supplies, clothing, human flesh, and the ship's timbers. By the time the riddled Desire drifted into Ireland's Bantry Bay in June 1593, 60 crewmen had died, and only 5 of the survivors were mobile. This gruesome story encapsulates the revolt of nature envisaged by the editors of Heresies, initiated not by a thunderous volcano, but by a tiny, virulent parasite. After this startling opening, Stuart's logbook leaps forward in time with an excerpt from the ornithologist Robert Cushman Murphy's Logbook for Grace, which describes a mass grave of Gentoo penguins he discovered on South Georgia Island in the Atlantic while traveling on a whaling ship in 1913. The logbook jumps forward again, charting a rapid sequence of disasters caused by the growth in the global shipping network for transporting petroleum in the 1960s and 70s. In each entry, Stuart lists the tons of petroleum leaked into the ocean and the ensuing decimation of marine organisms, mollusks, fish, birds, and mammals. She concludes her logbook with 2 recent oil spills at Bantry Bay in Ireland, where Gulf Oil had constructed a terminal for its supertankers in 1967. Looping back to the beginning of her logbook for Disgrace, Stuart finds it ironic that the corporation had chosen to build a port at the very location where the rotten hulk of the ship Desire had concluded its calamitous voyage 4 centuries earlier. In its succinct chronological entries, her logbook damningly links the histories of colonialism, extractivism, and environmental disaster. The critique of the global petroleum industry offered in Stuart's text is unusual in the context of her practice, which engages with the natural world in more abstract and poetic ways. Yet she'd long been fascinated by mariners' logbooks, and since 1972 had been making her own books in response to particular journeys and places. Every Wave book for Melville references the nautical narrative Moby Dick, a book Stuart had long admired. Both the stacked sheets of Every Wave and its lyrical title evoke passages from Herman Melville's novel. To make her book, Stuart cut small rectangular sheets of the muslin-mounted rag paper she used in her monumental scrolls, a material she'd discovered during her early work as a cartographic draftsperson. She rubbed each sheet with earth gathered from the north shore of Long Island, savoring the color, texture, and fragrance of the soil as she crumbled and smoothed it with her fingers. The tactile appeal of Stuart's chosen materials is underscored in Every Wave by the round, ocean-worn pebbles arranged in a grid on its uppermost sheet. The book is displayed, as you can see here, on a bed of sand and stones gathered from the beach in Long Island, as if this illegible yet potent object had washed up on the shore. These organic materials highlight paper's origins in living organisms while creating an ecocentric logbook that memorializes natural materials over written narratives. The work of Maren Hassinger appeared towards the end of Heresies 13 in a feature on environmental sculpture. Hassinger's Forest of 1980, which is seen on the center left of the page from Heresies, was reproduced alongside site-specific artworks by Patricia Johanson, seen in the center right, Jan Sullivan at the top, and Anne Preston at the bottom of the Heresies page. Forest was produced as part of the second biennial exhibition in the Art on the Beach series, held at New York's Battery Park landfill, which would later become the site of Battery Park City. Hassinger used wire rope she'd been working with since the early 70s to create a forest of wind-bent trees that interacted with actual trees, plants, and rocks on the man-made beach. In her statement for Heresies, she noted that wire rope was, quote, a product of our advanced industrial technology, the same technology which is fast making us extinct. The steel grey, leafless stems of forest have a post-apocalyptic quality that speaks to this ominous aspect of Hassinger's sculpture. Yet she went on to emphasize the organic forms of her work in spite of its industrial materials, admitting, quote, I think that in some way all my work expresses a nostalgia for a lost natural space, a perfection that is past. This sense of longing is felt in the way her steel trees mimic the slant of the tiny saplings around them, as if trying to recover a lost sense of harmony. Their performative gestures bring to mind earlier works by Hassinger, such as Tree Duet 1 and 2 of 1977, where she maneuvered her body in relation to a sculpture made from the bough of a tree entwined with wire rope. In 2 black and white photographs that document this interaction, Hassinger's limbs echo the tree's branches in a multi-species duet, and the unraveled ends of the wire rope merge visually with their twigs. The physical and conceptual intertwining of industrial and natural materials, sculpture and performance, despondency and longing, evident in Forest, runs throughout Hassinger's work. Trained in dance, sculpture, and fiber arts, she chose to employ wire rope, a fibrous structure of incredible strength used in architecture, mining, and suspension bridges. Despite its durability, wire rope can be manipulated into flowing lines or unraveled into its constituent fibers so that it resembles grass, bushes, haystacks, or trees. In Field of 1989, 4 various lengths of wire rope bristle from a grid of 25 concrete slabs, each strand unraveling into tenuous filaments that bend in unison without collapsing or breaking. The sculpture's placement on the floor makes these threads resemble resilient, weather-beaten vegetation. Hassinger has questioned the description of her work as ecological, stating that she's more concerned with cultural ecology and the legacies of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Structurally, her sculptures manifest a poetics of entanglement that upholds the agency of both humans and non-humans, searching for the ways in which they might function together. Patricia Johanson's drawing Leaf Fountain 3-8 Phyllotaxy was reproduced alongside Hassinger's forest in the Heresies Sculpture and Environment feature. Like Hassinger, Johanson studied at Bennington College, although she completed her undergraduate degree earlier in the 1960s under the mentorship of the minimalist sculptor Tony Smith. Johanson's drawing depicts a fountain organized via the principles of spiral phyllotaxis, a botanical term used to describe an arrangement of leaves on a plant stem. Such patterns had fascinated artists for centuries, and Johanson observed in a note on her drawing that Leon Battista Alberti, Leonardo da Vinci, and Andrea Palladio had all explored phyllotaxis as a manifestation of divine proportions. Johanson designed a fountain with waterfalls increasing in height according to the Fibonacci sequence. In her plan view drawing, different types of lines signify the distance water will fall as it cascades from the upper leaves towards the lower pools. As Johanson acknowledged in her notes, the system used to organize the fountain led to the fragmented oddness of the water's path. In the year that Heresies 13 was published, Johanson was approached to design a monumental sculpture for Dallas's Fair Park in honor of the state's 150th year. The Dallas Museum of Fine Arts was then located in Fair Park, and its director, Harry Parker, had seen an exhibition of Johanson's plant drawings. He initially planned to exhibit the drawings at the museum in conjunction with the proposed sculpture. But rather than designing a public sculpture, Johanson put forward a plan to redesign Fair Park's Lenhart Lagoon, a body of water that had long been contaminated with fertilizer used on the surrounding lawns and lacking in plants, animals, and fish. As we'll hear later today and tomorrow, Johanson initiated an ambitious work of environmental art that sought to remediate the damaged ecosystem of the lagoon. If minimal artists like her teacher Smith had shown the sculptural object to be a function of light, space, and the viewer's field of vision, in her Fair Park Lagoon project, Johanson pushed further, enmeshing her sculpture in a dynamic system of relationships that included synthetic and organic materials, human beings, and other species. Heresies 13 is a kind of time capsule that captures the heady ambitions of feminist art and politics in the early 1980s, as well as the disputes and contradictions that permeated the movement. The ecofeminist approach advocated in the issue fell out of favor in the years that followed, tarnished by charges of biological essentialism that mischaracterized the movement. Yet recent years have seen a resurgence of interest in the ecofeminist critique of interlocking forces of oppression, which has much in common with the intersectional approach of contemporary feminist thought. Although Stuart, Mendieta, Hassinger, and Johanson did not explicitly identify as ecofeminists, their work of the early 1980s boldly integrates social life, history, and natural environments, as the editors of Heresies 13 urged feminists to do. Thank you.